Did you know that the historical connection between Black Africans and early Chinese settlers dates back centuries? Uncovering this fascinating link sheds new light on the intricate web of global interactions throughout history. Explore this amazing bridge between continents with us as we pull apart the threads that tie these different groups together and look at the long-term effects of what they went through together. Early trade and maritime explorations. The establishment of the connection between Black Africans and early Chinese settlers was largely facilitated by early trade and maritime exploration, both of which played an important role in developing this relationship. These commercial endeavors made it easier for people to trade products and resources with one another. They paved the way for cultural exchanges and the establishment of new towns. Admiral Zheng was a pivotal player in the early maritime voyages that were conducted by the Chinese. Under the Ming Dynasty, Zheng He was in charge of a number of significant journeys that took place in the early 15th century and were known as treasure voyages. These expeditions aimed to increase China's sphere of influence, advance commercial interests, and forge diplomatic ties with other places. The missions led by Zheng He reached the eastern coast of Africa, specifically the regions that are now known as Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique. This was the first instance of Chinese sailors coming into direct contact with Black Africans. It took place during their interactions with African villages. The sea lanes that were opened as a result of these travels became extremely important commercial thoroughfares that linked the bustling marketplaces of China with the abundant resources and goods found in Africa. The economic relationship between Africa and China proved advantageous on both sides. China valued African goods such as gold, ivory, spices, and exotic animals. These items were exported to China. These things were in demand for a variety of uses, including as luxury items, components of medicinal preparations, and artifacts for religious ceremonies. Chinese business people had a strong interest in purchasing these African goods, which contributed to the expansion of trade between China and Africa. In exchange, Chinese merchants brought a diverse array of items and products from their home country to the African continent. Silk, porcelain, ceramics, textiles, ironware, and technological breakthroughs were some of the things that were created during this time. Not only did the advent of these Chinese commodities provide new and valuable items to African marketplaces, but it also supported local economies and fostered cultural interchange. In other words, it was a win-win situation. Settlements and cultural fusion. The construction of towns along the eastern coast of Africa by early Chinese settlers not only facilitated commerce and economic expansion, but also produced a unique cultural fusion between Chinese traditions and African customs. These people coexisted, interacted, and contributed to the creation of a rich multicultural society in the areas that would later become these settlements. These villages became active hubs of cultural interaction. The early Chinese settlers who made the decision to make Africa their home brought with them their native tongue, as well as their traditions, customs, and cultural practices. They created tight-knit communities inside larger African nations, which resulted in pockets of cultural diversity and interaction among the people living in those societies. Because of the mixing of Chinese and African cultures, a new language, cuisine, religious rituals, creative manifestations, and social standards have emerged as a result of this interaction. The language was a critical component in the process of cultural hybridization. Over time, a hybrid language formed, which combined aspects of Chinese with the languages spoken locally in Africa. Not only did this linguistic exchange make conversation and comprehension easier, but it also served as a symbol of the peaceful cohabitation and cultural integration that exists between the communities of Chinese and African people. Another area in which cultural fusion was particularly successful was the preservation of culinary traditions. Chinese colonists brought with them new culinary methods, ingredients, and flavors that they introduced to African cuisine. Local foods became influenced by Chinese cuisine, which led to the development of innovative fusion meals that brought together the culinary traditions of both countries. Chinese cooking techniques like stir-frying, steaming, and the manufacturing of dumplings have mixed with African products, flavors, and styles of cooking to produce a broad and eclectic repertoire of culinary options. Syncretism and fusion of religious practices and beliefs also occurred throughout history. Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism were only some of the religious traditions that early Chinese settlers carried with them to the new land. These ideas became intertwined with the indigenous spiritual practices of Africa, which led to the development of syncretic religious activities that combined aspects of both civilizations. This blending of religious traditions gave the settlers a feeling of spiritual direction. It helped them develop a sense of community and shared identity with one another. The fields of art and craftsmanship provided fertile ground for the mixing of cultures. The Chinese colonists carried their artistic practices and styles with them, such as calligraphy, painting, pottery, and ornamental arts, and they blended these practices and styles with the indigenous African artistic manifestations. This exchange of artistic practices resulted in the birth of novel artistic forms that demonstrated the similarities in both civilizations' histories as well as their respective capacities for inventiveness. The combination of African aesthetic sensibility with Chinese themes, patterns, and design components resulted in the development of visually fascinating artworks with important cultural significance. Additionally, social customs and norms were subject to the same process of mutual adaptation and impact. The Chinese colonists assimilated themselves into African communities by adopting local ways of life and rituals while maintaining certain components of their own cultural heritage. As a result of interactions between Chinese and African cultures, shared social norms, etiquettes, and rituals were developed, which contributed to the development of a sense of unity and commonality. Contributions to the local economy and cultural landscapes. The presence of early Chinese settlers in Africa had a considerable impact on the region's economy and the region's cultural landscapes. The Chinese introduced more modern agricultural techniques, such as irrigation and terracing, which improved farming techniques already in use in the area and contributed to an increase in the amount of food that was produced. This sharing of agricultural knowledge and experience contributed to the stimulation of economic growth and improved the quality of life for people living in African communities. In addition, Chinese settlers made significant contributions to the local art scene and the fields of building and craftsmanship. They brought new methods of crafting ceramics, textiles, and other items, which enriched the artistic traditions of the areas in which they landed. As a result of this cultural interchange, creativity and innovation were encouraged, which led to the emergence of original artistic styles that blended aspects of both Chinese and African aesthetics, religious and philosophical influences. The link between early Chinese settlers and Black Africans included religious and philosophical influences. Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism were among the world religions that Chinese colonists brought with them when they arrived in the Americas. These faiths found receptive audiences among African communities, which led to the development of syncretic religious practices, which combined aspects of Chinese beliefs with those of indigenous African beliefs. The philosophical teachings of Confucius, such as the emphasis on moral values, family, and social harmony, resonated with the societies of Africa. Certain portions of those teachings were absorbed into the cultural practices of the local communities. The extent of the link between early Chinese settlers and Black Africans is further demonstrated by the fusion of spiritual and philosophical beliefs that exists between the two groups. Residue and contemporary significance. Although the early relationship between Black Africans and early Chinese settlers may have faded from conventional history narratives, the residue of this connection can still be observed in various areas of African culture. Today, populations that are located along the eastern coast of Africa, such as the Swahili people, display a rich blend of influences from Africa, Arab, and China in their linguistic expressions, culinary practices, architectural designs, and creative expressions. Furthermore, the historical connection between Black Africans and early Chinese settlers serves as a reminder of the larger narrative of human migration, cultural exchange, and global interconnection. This is because Black Africans were among the first Chinese settlers. It calls into question the premise that different civilizations existed in isolation from one another and brings attention to the consistent movement of ideas, goods, and people across huge distances throughout history. What do you think of the video? Let us know in the comment below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button before you go. Thanks for watching.